Hi everyone, happy Friday. I am just waiting for Evie to join me, but I am super excited today to be talking about menstrual cycles and how that affects your Enneagram and all of that. And here Evie is, and so I'm going to invite her in. Let's see how I can do that. Okay. This out, but I just invited her in, so hopefully she will be able to join me here in a minute. There we go. There she is.
Hello. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Evie.
Oh.
Great pleasure to see you again today. I always struggle with letting people in, so I'm like, okay, am I doing this right today?
Is that just a type 9 thing, Lindsay?
I'm not sure if it's a type 9 thing or what it is. But I'm super excited to be having you join me today. You and I met a couple months ago where you reached out, and we realized that we have some work that we're doing in common, and I was really interested in learning more about the work that you're doing around the menstrual cycle and sort of how that impacts our Enneagram type and relationships, and I'm really excited to learn, and I'm sure the people that are on today are really excited to learn more about that as well. But I thought we would start just by introducing ourselves and then have you go right into it. So my name is Lindsay Frazier. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist, and an IA-accredited professional out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Some of you have watched me before, but I have a small private practice in South Minneapolis where I specialize in relationships and sexuality, utilizing the Enneagram. So menstrual cycles is a huge impact on our sexuality and relationships. And so I'll let Evie introduce herself.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Yes, so I'm a certified Enneagram coach and I'm a menstrual cycle advocate. I have a coaching practice here in the UK. I'm in the north of England, in Sheffield, and I work with all different types of clients, whether they are experiencing a menstrual cycle themselves, whether they live with somebody that has a menstrual cycle and they want to understand more, or maybe they are finished their menstrual cycle and they're into their menopause now. So it's an absolute joy to be having this conversation with you, Lindsay, today, because you're so right. The link between menstrual cycles and our sexuality and our relationship and then our Enneagram type is huge. And so, yeah, it feels really exciting to be having this conversation today, I think.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about just how, those cycles of the menstrual cycle and just how that kind of impacts how we show up. I thought it was really interesting, which I know you're going to talk more about, but just like how men's hormones and women's hormones are really different.
Yeah, they are really different. So different, in fact, that we're almost, a month apart. If you think about the moon cycle and the sun cycle, we get a good sense of female and male hormonal cycles. So the male hormonal cycle is about 24 hours long-ish, obviously dependent a little bit body to body. And the female hormonal cycle is about 28 days, or sometimes 30, or sometimes 32, or sometimes 24, dependent on your exact body. So the differences are huge. But if we look specifically at the menstrual cycle right now, we kind of think about our period, and then we get on with the rest of the month, or get on with the rest of the cycle. And I think it's really key to remember that there are actually 4 parts of the menstrual cycle. Yes, we have that period, that bleed at the beginning of our cycle, but then we also move through into our follicular phase and our ovulatory phase and then our luteal phase. And I think that's not something maybe a lot of us were taught in school maybe. I don't know if you were, Lindsay. I don't know if that's newer information to you at this point in your life, or whether you grew up with that kind of fantastic knowledge.
Well, what I think is really interesting about that is I did not get a whole lot like in my youth, right? When I was doing sexual education through elementary school, or even the sexual education I got in high school and things like that. It's interestingly enough, like even when I became a sex therapist, we don't really talk about this. A lot of this was me doing my own research and gathering information and trying to understand it in more depth. But I think it's really fascinating, even with that like sex therapy certification, where like I had to get additional training to be able to work with sexual issues. It's like we kind of touch on menstruation, but we don't actually even talk about sort of the hormones or the cycles or what that looks like. And I think that's really common for a lot of women.
Yeah, totally. I think I think that's such an interesting journey that you've been on, with furthering your education. You're this incredible, you've done this incredible extra course, you've furthered your education, and yet, menstrual cycles are such a huge part of sex and intimacy. And that was, just barely touched on. Feels like, a great example of just women's rights throughout the globe almost. It's such a huge part of, so many conversations around sex and intimacy. So to all of us maybe only just now getting the information that we need, that's where my passion really is, making sure that the people that need this information and want this information have it. And when we look at these 4 phases, so menstruation, and then the follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and then the luteal phase, we can see 4 very different and pronounced versions of ourselves. And so then from, studying the Enneagram, I kind of began to think, actually, this kind of lines up with maybe our instinctual subtypes, or perhaps our lines to stress and health. And so I began to do research, and I think it's pretty interesting to perhaps look at the menstrual cycle from this point of view, and maybe then reframe our point of view. So for example, when we think of the period, most of us that have periods think, the period, I don't want to do this is going to suck, I might be in pain, I don't want to be tired, I've got things I need to do, I don't have time for this, let me ignore it, or let me fight my body on this, or let me pretend this isn't happening. And actually, there are so many, amazing qualities that the period provides for us that we just maybe haven't learned to tap into yet. And I think one of them could be heading towards our growth number, if we're looking at it from the point of view of the Enneagram. So, on our period, if we're really living in tune with our body, or living cyclically, we're resting, we're recharging, we are releasing, our body is physically releasing the uterine lining. We emotionally maybe have more access to being able to do that. And so if we think about maybe releasing some of the top line behavior that is just self-protection, or for me as a type 1, that inner critic is, with me all the time. But if I can release those expectations a little bit and relax and rest, actually there's an opportunity for me to kind of head towards that health path, potentially. It is an idea that I've been playing with in my practice and seeing with clients. But I think what's really key to remember is that the period doesn't have to be such a terrible time. Period pain is really common. It's not normal. None of us should be experiencing it. It's a byproduct of the circumstance that we're living in. I wonder, for you, Lindsay, do you see it a lot in your practice with women, female clients who just struggle so much a week of the month, and notice big issues relationally during that time, I wonder?
Especially right before you're kind of going into the period, so that later luteal phase, I do see a lot of people struggle. It's interesting when you were saying, it's like, I kind of like the menstrual cycle, because so I guess we forgot to say what our Enneagram types are, but I'm a 9, so I'm like, it's an excuse to like, I can like be cozy and like put my heating pad on, and like I can like tell people, I'm like, no, I need to rest, I need to relax right now. And so I actually kind of find that menstrual cycle, I mean, I don't like the pain, the menstrual pain that comes with it, though I've been trying to find different things to sort of manage that. But it's like, I do like the like kind of excuse to like, I can just rest. But I think it's very interesting how you say I really started to think more about the Enneagram type and just what I was observing and seeing. And it's like, oh, it's so interesting, just how we all behave differently during our menstrual cycle, sort of depending on that Enneagram type, and especially that later luteal phase, which I know you're going to talk about a little bit later. But yes, a lot of the conflicts and issues that people have in their relationships are happening. I mean, I think we already knew this, but like often right before that period comes.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, yeah, I think I love working with type 9s when working with the menstrual cycle, because you guys really do have it down. You're very good at it. When we think about maybe a 3 or an 8 who's been told to rest and take some time, yes, that's much, much harder. But, 9s really should be leading the way on this period revolution that we're beginning to see, definitely. However, maybe more of a trouble spot for 9s, and maybe for a few other types as well, could be that follicular phase. So as we're coming out of our period, as our bleed is finishing, and we start to get this, surge of energy, we've got, rise of estrogen coming in, which allows us to feel more motivated and energized, and that's can be really exciting, or a bit annoying. If you love to be cozy and aren't quite ready to let go of that, there can be a bit of a tug, a bit of a tussle between what the body wants and what our personality, what our type wants. And that's quite an interesting point, I think, to be aware of when we're working maybe more with withdrawing types and we're looking at the follicular phase. Yeah, actually, how can we, honor both our body and our mind? How can we do that well? Sometimes the mind is gonna lie to us. The body very rarely, if ever, is gonna lie to us. And so how do we honor that? How do we have that conversation well? Well, I think firstly, it's awareness and education. It's knowing that, yeah, in a few days, I'm gonna feel more energized. Maybe that's gonna feel affronting to me because I have to, leave my blanket. And even as a type 1, when I wing into my 9, I know that feeling well. But how can we be aware of that and use that? And also, plan around that. If we know we've got our period coming up and our follicular is going to follow that, what can we push into the next week? What can we say no to this week and push to when we have more energy? And when I think about, from a relational point of view and from when working with clients, it's, not having the big conversations during your period, okay? All of your hormones are at their lowest. You have the least to give. We're not diving into the big money budget conversations during that time. Can you save that for follicular? Is that a possibility, which I think is exciting to think about. But then after the follicular phase, we have this moment, this instantaneous, magnetic, creative, juicy ovulation moment, which is super exciting. Ovulation actually signifies, the end of our fertile window, which I think is just key to know. It's often being taught as that would be the moment to try and get pregnant. It's not. That is the end of the window, just as a bit of extra information there. But it is this moment where communication and confidence and connection come really easily to us from a hormonal point of view. And that's really exciting if you're, an aggressive stance, or maybe if you are, well, actually for all the subtypes, there's moments there for all of us. But it's this really beautiful moment where we feel really in tune with our bodies, really connected to our bodies. And so I often think of body repressed types here who, tend to struggle to get into their body. Actually, this is a moment to maybe, I don't know how you feel about planning in intimacy, Lindsay. You'll have to lead the conversation on that. But this could be a moment to maybe plan that in, or plan for an intimate moment to happen, because your body is going to be at its optimal place to kind of receive that intimacy. I wonder what your thoughts would be on that.
I mean, I think that we kind of have this idea that we shouldn't have to plan sexuality or intimacy, but in reality, like the farther we get in our lives, the more things that are demanding time, right, from us. And so like one of the things that I will often say is like not planning sex per se, but putting aside time for romantic, sensual connection in your relationship with the opportunity for sex to happen, especially for my one in particular. They really need this in the sense of, because and some other types will as well. They have their list of things to do and the things are getting done, and it's sort of like they're not, unless that space is made for that to happen and occur, it's not going to happen. And I think what's wonderful sort of about the follicular and ovulation phase is, like, if you know what your cycle is, like, it's easier to then also like sort of like use those natural hormones that are happening in the body to kind of like make it even more of a pleasurable, enjoyable sort of experience, because our bodies do respond to sexual intimacy in a much different way when we're in those phases versus like when we're in later luteal phase, right? Oftentimes, like, I notice things like lubrication are easier, just having the desire are easier, and so like making, like, I think it's wonderful idea of like using your natural hormone cycle to sort of this is the time to sort of have play and to get it on and to be sexual with your partner. And I often have like my, when I have heterosexual relationships, like I will oftentimes have like the partner, have the fertility app, not because they're trying to get pregnant, but just so that the partner has awareness around of like, where is their partner today? One, like, when are they going to be more open and willing and kind of like more playful towards sexual intimacy, and sort of like when to back off as well. Or like when you're starting to get sort of more of, the kind of more like conflictual periods of time that will often happen, around that later luteal phase and things like that as well. Like not that it's okay for people to behave however they do, but also having more generosity for your partner and recognizing that their hormones are influencing and affecting sort of how they're showing up during that phase. And it's been huge. Like, I have one couple in particular where he's like, if I know, he's like, I can kind of be a little bit more generous and loving and caring. And he's like, but you still need to take accountability for when you do behave that. And this is actually, this is a 1/6 relationship that I have in my office. Yeah, and she is the one. And he said, it's huge for me, that reassurance that like we're okay, like even when you are sort of struggling more with kind of that emotionality or having more like rigidity. Because what will happen is there's more rigidity for her around how things should be, and they're not kind of happening that way, and then she gets more frustrated. Which I think is really common for the ones that I've seen in my office to sort of happen and occur during those phases. And for him, as the 6, like when we're just talking Enneagram type, like I just want reassurance we're okay. I want reassurance that you still want to connect to me. And so I think it's just huge. Like I've even like been paying more attention to myself, and I was like, oh my gosh, like even like how I myself behave. And I was like, I go to a lot of 6 tendencies sort of like in that later luteal phase. And then some of my like social fears, I'm a social dominant, will kind of also come up to play. And I've been like observing that more with clients. And it's like just a very interesting, I just love that you're doing this work, because it's a very interesting thing that I think will be really helpful for couples and individuals sort of in their sexuality and relationships.
Yeah, totally. I think that's key. I mean, let's talk about the luteal phase. So this is the longest part of our cycle. It's around 2 weeks. So this moment of ovulation happens, and hopefully you've had some really great sex, and then within 12 hours you can be, the luteal phase can hit you, and especially in that second half of the luteal phase, so that second week just before your period is arriving. Yeah, wow. We're seeing progesterone rise, which can in turn make serotonin be lower, dopamine be lower, and it can be a real trickier time. And so I think this part of the cycle is primed and ready for our stress path, 100%. Just like you were saying, Lindsay, about you going to your 6, or me to my 4. It absolutely, and for me as well, I'm a sexual subtype. So then I'm a 4 who is, absolutely obsessed with my husband and making sure that we're okay. And yeah, you know, if that amazing sex hasn't happened during ovulation because we haven't planned it in because I'm a type 1 and I need the sheets to be clean. You know, that's just an example, you know. That can be, you know, a really heightened moment of actually the wheels feel like they're coming off the bus. I feel like I'm heading for my stress number and I don't know how to pull back. I don't know how to get back. And again, I think it's having that awareness. Awareness, I do think, is half the battle. If you know you're going into your luteal phase ahead of time, you can prepare for it. And so I really do think, and this will show up differently for each of the types, but I think for every type, honoring that sacred no during your luteal phase is incredibly important. So having a backstop of, I'll check, I'll let you know, and not just saying yes to everything, because our energy is starting to fade, and we need to kind of respond to that accordingly. And so then when we think about that from, you know, a relational point of view, that's huge. If your partner can know where you are in your cycle and then doesn't happen to invite, you know, a bunch of people over after work, that or you know, whatever the example is there, I think that's really huge to be able to start pinpointing these moments and then preparing for them. And again, like we said at the beginning of this conversation, not having these big conversations, you know, in those few days before your period, it's not the time to do it. If you can plan, you know, conversations around your phases, I think that's, you know, again, maybe half of the work to having and sustaining, you know, a healthy and for the most part happy relationship. But I think also really key to remember is the fact that we are talking as two people with, you know, very different cycles from each other, and you know, as you're listening to this, if you're sat at home right now, your cycle might feel slightly different to what we're describing. Absolutely. And that's the thing about Enneagram types and menstrual cycles. There's just so much nuance, and there's so much specificity in both your menstrual cycle and your Enneagram type. So if something isn't hitting home for you, don't take it on. And if something is helpful, absolutely use it. But don't feel pressured into making your menstrual cycle fit into you know, a rigid box. You know, let it be what it is. Work with it in whatever way feels helpful. If you want to bring your partner into it, I think that's awesome. If you don't want to, there's no pressure to. But you know, I definitely in my practice seeing huge changes just to, yeah, this kind of the lower level bickering and the trouble spots that people just keep finding themselves in month after month with their partner, you know, during this luteal phase moment. Yeah, it's huge. It is quite real. So it potentially is something that is worth, you know, looking at and being aware of, I think. I don't know how that sounds to you, Lindsay, when you see people, lots of different people, I'm sure in your practice, everybody's showing up to their menstrual cycle differently. Have you noticed any trends between different types?
I mean, I think, well, I see a lot of like 1s and 9s in my practice,
Oh, sure.
so it's interesting. But I think that, you know, it is very interesting when you say sort of around like even like the assertive types, right? And just that like not wanting to slow down or to rest or do the things that are necessary sort of through that menstrual phase. And that I would say that's definitely true. There can be that conflictual of like I should be doing and I'm not doing, and maybe struggling with that a little bit more. And I think, like you said, like no menstrual cycle is going to look like the other. And I think I love how you're putting the Enneagram in relationship to that, because I think that actually is a huge factor. And I'm going to start paying more attention, because this was not something I've been thinking about until you mentioned it. But it's like, yeah, there are patterns with that, right? And that ability, and like that, you know, a lot of like each of these, I mean, to me, it's like the more I hear you speak, it's like each of these have something to teach us. And each of these are going to be easier and harder for you depending on sort of what that Enneagram type is. And like what a beautiful sort of another tool to have in your toolbox of like, how do you reach, that growth, or that, having that more ability to be your higher self, and recognizing your tendencies sort of around the Enneagram and your types, and how your hormones play such a huge factor into it. And like, we don't talk enough about sort of how the hormones influence or affect how we show up. But yeah, it is interesting, just like that. Like, my nines don't have a problem. My nines don't have a problem resting. They actually have a harder time when it starts time to start getting moving again. So, but it's the opposite for the assertive types. So I think that that's interesting. And I think that, like, sometimes for the compliant types too, is that nervousness, that anxiousness about like, am I, I see that kind of amplify a little bit in that late luteal phase, and like needing reassurance or affirmation from the partner that like, we're okay, you still love me. So that even fit from what you were saying there as well. I was like, yes, that definitely fits with the compliant types. And I hadn't really even thought about that. But then when I think about the clients in my office, I'm like, that very much fits for what I'm seeing and observing within them as well. Why do you think it's so essential to understand the Enneagram yourself, like in the menstrual cycle?
I just think it's huge. I think I like to think of them a little bit like keys to life, or maps to life. I think that's what Enneagram, loosely translates to from the ancient Greek. So I do think of it kind of like having two maps that if you put them over one another, oh gosh, there's a really clear version of me at all these different moments that I can use to plan my life, so live cyclically, have deeper, better, more efficient conversations with my significant other, with the people I work with my family. And then also just, this sense of self. So often we feel, or are made to feel, crazy, with our menstrual cycle as women or as people that bleed. And actually, if we can pinpoint the different parts in the cycle that we maybe would struggle with more dependent on our type, we can start to eradicate some of that shame and start to reprogram some of those automatic negative thoughts. And then also start to live in a way that helps to change the society that we're living in. We need huge structural change when it comes to menstrual cycles and bleeding. And I think having this, clearer sense of self and clearer sense of worth and power, that is always going to lead to, lasting, sustaining change for all of us, because actually this work betters all of us. And so I think it's really those three key moments, or three key parts of the puzzle that I think are really key. Using the Enneagram is just going to deepen all of that knowledge in a way that makes it potentially way more tangible and practical, and way more we can understand it on a deeper level when it's related to us. Because if I'm talking about how so many people find it difficult to rest on their period, and resting is the key moment for the period, and you're sat there as a 9 saying, oh, well, I don't struggle to rest. Actually, yes, having the information of, oh, well, we know why you potentially wouldn't struggle to rest as much, but, me as a 1, oh, that is a tricky moment. I don't like it. And so having that information is just going to deepen that knowledge, and also deepen that power as well. Being able to rest on your period, that's a superpower. That is an absolute superpower for the type 9, and that is maybe going to boost your identity and sense of self as well, knowing that, potentially. Yeah. I can see that we're coming to the end of the time. I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours.
We could definitely. I was telling you that these 30 minutes go so quickly. Yes, we could definitely talk more about this. I was actually just even thinking about my women that are in relationship with women, and like, having to navigate 2 people's cycles and overlap, and I can't imagine. So my women that are in relationships with women, you've got your work cut out for you. but maybe at the same time you understand the complexities of that as well, you know, in a different way. But yeah, that was something that just popped into my head, because I have quite a few women that are in relationship with women in my office as well. But I just think again, how impactful, right? Because then even for the women or for heterosexual relationships, I guess the men that are with men have it easier. They're 24-hour cycles. They can, you know, navigate that. But I think it's that, you know, just how impactful that could be in relationships, to just understand how you show up differently in your Enneagram type, in those different cycles of the menstrual cycle, and just that ability to kind of navigate that and understand and have more compassion and generosity for each other. I love the work that you've been doing, and I was really excited to connect. And I think we definitely should continue to do so. But yes, we are coming to an end. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the things that we have coming. So if you want to share a little bit, I know you have like a workshop or
I have a free webinar out at the moment. So if this, you know, has been interesting and you'd like to learn more, my free webinar is a really great place to, you know, get involved. The link is in my bio. You can just sign up and it'll be yours for free. You can also sign up to my mailing list, where you get a bunch of free resources on how to look after yourself throughout each phase of the menstrual cycle. And then I also have a summer course starting on July 1st, all about how to live in tune with your cycle and your Enneagram type. So again, it's a really exciting time. If this is something that's been speaking to you as you're watching this back on replay, or maybe as you're watching now, get involved, send me a DM, and check out what we've got going on over at the Type Guide, because it feels pretty exciting. But what do you have on at the moment, Lindsay? I think you have a website.
Well, we've always got you know, Sexy First Fridays that I do with Sam. So if you want to hear Enneagram, relationship, and sexuality, we do that once a month. Actually, next month we're doing it twice, because her and I are going to be at the IA conference together. So we're going to do one together there, and then we will have the first Friday in July, and we haven't determined yet when we're going to do it at the IA conference, but we are going to be doing one there with both of us in person, so that's pretty exciting. And then I have some communication workshops and intimacy workshops, things that I'm planning for the fall. As many of you know, I have 2 small kiddos that are 7 and 5, and some of you don't know, because you might know Evie and not me. So, but I stay home part-time with my kids. And that's one of the beautiful things of being a therapist. You have the capacity to do that. And so it's summer break, so they're with me. so it's Sexy First Fridays for the summer. But in the fall, I have plans to do some communication and intimacy and Enneagram type workshops as well. So and maybe we should do some more of these occasionally as well and share with people too. So I just want to say thank you for all of you that joined live. It's great to see people here, and I know a lot of you will be watching this on replay. But have a wonderful Friday, and thank you for joining me, Evie.
Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay. It's been an incredible conversation. I think you're so awesome. So yeah, thanks for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day.